It's a pretty song, isn't it? Melech Malchaya from Zusha and their new album, Open the Gates. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on a Wednesday night, middle of the week, crossing over, getting ready for Shabbos? Yehud in South Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, James in Indianapolis, John in Maine, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Sedona, Sharon in New Jersey, Renee in Indiana, Bella in Florida, Gwen in Kalamazoo. Paula likes the music, Steven in Maine, Patrice in Utah, Paula in the Northwest, Tom wishing a Freiliche Mittwoch. That must be a word, huh? It sounds like a word, midweek, right? Middle of the week, Mittwoch, Wednesday. I like it. In soon-to-be hot Pennsylvania. Joshua in Florida, Kathy in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Kathy. Must be late at night there. Bill in mid-Missouri, Dorothy in Pittsburgh. Or maybe you're so far away that it's the morning, but it's the different day. I mean, the calendar with Australia to here is always crazy. PK is in Colorado. Franco's in the house from Trieste, Italy. Wanda in Austin, Texas. I love the people tuning in from across the world. Guy in Dayton. Yehudit Sobel, it's your birthday today. That's right. Yom Haledet Sameach to you. May this be your best year yet. Great to have you learning with us on your birthday. Give us a bracha. Give us all a bracha. You can ask a person for a blessing on their birthday. Belle is in North Texas. Paul is in from Chicago. Rebecca in LA. Oh, so Mittwoch is the Yiddish word for Wednesday. You see how ignorant I am. Thank you, Tom. I love it. Lucy in Minnesota. Yitzhak is in from Kansas City and Aoife from Florida over there on the YouTube side. I am going to try to keep it moving today. I'll tell you why. This year is a big reunion, a big college reunion for me. And I would be going there. It's in May, end of May. But this year, Shavuos lands right after Shabbos. So it's a 3-day Hag, Shabbos, and then the 2 days of Shavuos. And that lands right on my big college reunion. It's just not going to work. I mean, I'd be confined to my hotel room and walking and not being able to really enjoy the events there. So I'm not going to my college reunion, but tonight they're having a mini reunion for the people who live in the LA area. It actually just started 5 minutes ago, so I wasn't going to cancel another class since we're already a day behind. So I'm going to just get through the material tonight and then bolt so I can join my classmates at our mini reunion. So here we go. We're picking this up at the bottom of 21b. Today's daf is 22 here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. We're discussing Mishnah number 3. We're going to finish that and go into Mishnah number 4 tonight. So yesterday we were talking about these secondary prohibited relationships, kind of 1 degree further out or more from the explicitly prohibited relationships that would constitute incest as described in the Torah. And then the sages, the rabbis, made a fence around the Torah and included other relationships which weren't written in the Torah, but which are close enough that they could cause confusion. And if they weren't prohibited, people might come to make an error and transgress a written prohibition. So concluding that discussion, the Gemara states that a Maimar permitted the wife of one's father's brother, so your great uncle's wife, and the sister of one's father's father, right? The sister of your grandfather. Rav Hillel said to Rav Ashi, challenging a Maimar's statement, I myself saw a list of the secondary prohibited relationships written by Mar, the son of Rabbana. And it was written there that 16 women are forbidden. Now, what? Is it not that these 16 must be the 8 cases listed in the Baraisa and 6 from the school of Rabbi Chia, and these 2 cases of the wife of one's father's brother and one's father's sister, and this totals 16. And Rav Ashi defended a Maimar's opinion. And according to your reasoning, Rav Hillel, that these cases should be included, there are 17 cases, as there is the additional case of the wife of a mother's maternal half-brother whose status was resolved earlier, concluding that she is forbidden. If it is as you say, then there should be 17 cases. And the Gemara answers on behalf of Rav Hillel, La Kasha, this is not difficult. Those two, the wife of a father's brother and the sister of a father's father, are similar to each other and are counted as a single case. They're both great aunts, and so there are 16. And the Gemara restates Rav Hillel's challenge to a Maimar's opinion. But in any case, I myself saw them written as prohibited. And Rav Ashi said to Rav Hillel, and according to your reasoning, if in the list it was written that they were permitted, would you have relied on that? Is the signature of Mar, the son of Rabbana, signed on this list that you saw? Although you saw the list, you do not know for certain who wrote it. Now, too, that it is written that they are prohibited, the same holds true. The signature of Mar, the son of Rabbana, is not signed on that list, and so it cannot be relied upon to reject the opinion of a Maimar. One of the sages of the school of Rabbi Chia taught the third generation from one's son and one's daughter, in other words, one's great-grandchildren, and the third generation from his wife's son and his wife's daughter, i.e., your wife's great-grandchildren, are all forbidden as secondary forbidden relationships. And so too the fourth generation from his father-in-law and from his mother-in-law, i.e., his wife's great-grandmothers, are prohibited as secondary forbidden relationships. Now, how often is this happening that a person would think to marry his great-grandmother or his wife's great-grandmother? You know, his wife who died, and then marry her great-grandmother. But as you can see, they're spelling it out. What exactly are the rules? What are the principles involved? Really doesn't matter that it's never going to come up in real life. But understanding the principle involved, will help us come closer to understanding God's law and what God's will is for us. But also, weirder things have probably happened in history, and they wouldn't want to work out the law under the pressure of that relationship coming before the rabbinic court. Better to have it worked out in advance. Now, Ravina said to Rav Ashi, what is different between the generations above, referring to his wife's great-grandmothers, such that the sage counts his wife as one of the generations and refers to them as the fourth generation? And what is different with regard to the generations below, referring to his great-granddaughters? God forbid a person should think to marry his great-granddaughter, but same reasoning applies. Why would we work this out as a legal matter? Such that he did not count his wife and referred to them as only the third generation. Why? It seems like we're moving the same number of generations back in time or forward in time, but it's called the third generation when we go one way and the fourth generation when we go the other. Why? The Gemara answers, when counting above great-grandparents, the prohibition stems from his wife, as they are not his blood relatives, but his wife's. Therefore, she is counted. When counting below, however, the prohibition does not stem from his wife, as they are his own blood relatives, his descendants, and so she was not counted. Now the Gemara objects, but he includes the granddaughter of his wife's son and his wife's daughter in his list of those forbidden due to his wife, meaning maybe his wife had a previous marriage, she brought children to the marriage, and his wife's son, that is not his biological son, nonetheless, his wife's son's granddaughter is prohibited to him as a secondary prohibited relationship, right? But he includes the granddaughter of his wife's son and his wife's daughter in his list of those forbidden due to his wife, and yet he does not count her and refer to this as the fourth generation. And the Gemara answers, since he already taught 3 generations below himself, i.e. his own great-granddaughter, and there he did not count from his wife because it is his own blood relative. He taught 3 generations below his wife and did not count her. Instead, he referred to her great-granddaughter also as 3 generations below to maintain the uniform style of his words. And Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana, do those secondary forbidden relationships taught by one of the sages of the school of Rabbi Chia have a conclusion, or do they not have a conclusion? Are those specified cases alone forbidden, or are all generations above and below also forbidden? We saw that language yesterday. To have a conclusion means that, is it that generation which is the end of the prohibition, and then the child of that generation, the fifth generation above or the fourth generation below, do they become permitted? Or is this case that's being taught to us and taught as a way of illustrating the fact that all generations, going up the ladder, ancestors of his wife or descendants of his wife, are going to be prohibited as secondary relationships? Come in here, the answer that Rav said, 4 women have a conclusion. This implies that it is only these 4 and no more, that it ends with that or with her, and beyond that is permitted, but only in those 4 cases. Now, the Gemara rejects this. Perhaps when Rav said this, he was referring only to the relationships listed in that baraisa and not to all cases of secondary relationships. So the Gemara suggests, come in here from the baraisa itself, which states, the 3rd generation from his son and his daughter, and the 4th generation from his father-in-law and mother-in-law. And this implies that with regard to the 3rd and 4th generations, yes, they are forbidden, but more than that, no. The Gemara rejects this. Perhaps this means that from the 3rd onward and from the 4th onward. And the Gemara does not resolve this issue. We move on to a new question. Rava said to Rav Nachman, did the master see this one of the sages who came from the west, meaning from Eretz Yisrael to the community in Bavel, in Babylonia, who said, in the west, they asked whether the sages issued a decree prohibiting secondary forbidden relationships for converts, or whether they did not issue a decree prohibiting secondary forbidden relationships for converts. Now, a convert to Judaism is a Jew in every way, and we are not allowed to remind the convert that he is a convert lest we embarrass him or her, right? So a convert is a Jew in every way, like one who is born a Jew. So why would these secondary prohibited relationships, why would one even think to apply the secondary prohibited relationships differently to a convert as compared to one who is born a Jew? And the answer is that when, for example, I have a friend who converted to Judaism, and I'm the gabbai in our minyan. And so when I call him to take an aliyah at the Torah, it's easy for me to remember his Hebrew name, right? And when you're called to the Torah, I am Yoel ben Avinoam. My Hebrew name is Yoel. My father's Hebrew name is Avinoam. So I'm Yoel ben Avinoam, who happen to be Levites. So I'm Yoel ben Avinoam Halevi. Now, my friend, I'm not going to say what his Hebrew name is for matters of privacy, but his father's name for sure is Avraham. My son's Hebrew name happens to be Avraham too. But every convert their Hebrew name is the son of Avraham v'Sarah, right? The children of Abraham and Sarah. Every convert's Hebrew parents are understood to be Abraham and Sarah, the parents of the Jewish people, the original parents of the Jewish people. So, and we have a teaching, we're going to come to it in just a few paragraphs, that for the matters of Jewish law, halachically speaking, a convert is considered to be a newborn babe, right? And just for purposes of Jewish law, like they don't have any blood relatives. Obviously, they have relationships with their biological relatives who they grew up among. And the question I asked in the title of today's show is something that I looked up just to confirm it. According to the 5th commandment, one must honor his parents, right? Your mother and your father. So if the convert is understood to break ties for matters of Jewish law with their biological relatives, and they have sort of this new set of parents who are Abraham and Sarah, the parents of all Jewish people, then perhaps they would be allowed to, marry secondary prohibited relationships that a Jew would not be allowed because they're not related to those people anymore. But the fact is, we'll see the prohibited relationships do apply to converts as well. And the 5th commandment does apply to a convert vis-a-vis his biological parents. He is commanded to honor his parents. And why wouldn't he? It's logical. Your parents gave you life, and no matter how flawed they were as parents or how wonderful they were as parents, if you ended up becoming a convert to Judaism, then all of your experiences that led up to that, including your upbringing and your parents who gave you life, were part of the gifts and blessings that you received. And of course, you should honor your parents. So let's continue. Now, here's Rav Steinsaltz's note on this subject. Now, the reason for the rabbinic prohibition against marriage of converts to their relatives, because you would think, well, maybe they can marry their relatives, even close relatives, since technically they're no longer related to them when they become a Jew. But the rabbis decreed, no, these prohibitions do apply to a convert as well. Why? The reason for the rabbinic prohibition against marriage of converts to their relatives is lest the converts say that they came from a more stringent level of sanctity as Gentiles to a state of lesser sanctity as Jews, since previously forbidden relationships would then be permitted to them. We wouldn't want you to think that somehow your level of sanctity went down when you became a Jew. Your level of sanctity should only go up as you adopt the obligations and mitzvahs of a Jew. And the Ritva writes that by this rationale, in the case of one who converts to Judaism from a religion that is more stringent with regard to forbidden relationships, these relations should remain forbidden to the convert even after his conversion to Judaism. This would be even if in that other religion, there were even more prohibited relationships than there are in Judaism. He should maintain those prohibitions even after he becomes a Jew. Quite interesting. Now, Rav Nachman did not answer whether he had seen this sage, but said to him, now, with regard to all the forbidden relationships themselves, were it not for the fact that if converts would find that as Jews they were permitted to enter into relationships that were forbidden to them as Gentiles, and would say that they went from a state of more stringent sanctity as Gentiles to a state of lesser sanctity as Jews, then the sages would not have decreed to prohibit these relationships. Without the rabbinic decree, it would have been permitted for a convert to marry even a close female relative, even his twin sister, who also converted to Judaism, and this is because a convert has the legal status of a newborn with no family ties. But they did decree that all these relationships are prohibited so that you wouldn't think that he went to lesser sanctity when he converted. Now, is it necessary to state that the sages did not extend that decree to include secondary forbidden relationships? The purpose of the rabbinic prohibitions is to protect the Torah prohibitions. But in the case of converts, this particular Torah prohibition does not apply. Rav Nachman said, since the issue of converts and their relatives has come to hand and is the topic of discussion, let us say a matter of halacha, of law. Maternal half-brothers who both convert may not testify together as a pair of witnesses before the court. But if they did testify, their testimony is valid. Although blood relatives are invalid as witnesses, right? In a rabbinic court, let's say it's a capital case that they're going to say that they witnessed a murder, and you need two witnesses for a conviction. But if the two witnesses are a husband and wife or two brothers, then they can't testify. They can't be closely related to each other. So if these were maternal half-brothers who were not Jewish and both converted to Judaism, so now they're Jewish witnesses, now they're Jews and qualified as witnesses, and are they brothers or not, right? Because when they became converts, their previous relationships are technically severed. And so they should be able to testify, even though they were born as brothers, they were born as non-Jews. Now that they're Jews, it's like they're newborns. So they may not testify together as a pair of witnesses. This is one of those things where the sages did a decree that technically shouldn't apply, but they made it apply. Although blood relatives are invalid as witnesses, converts are considered as though they have no relations. Paternal half-brothers who both convert may testify together ab initio, since the law does not consider paternal half-brothers of Gentiles to be true relatives. A Maimar said even maternal half-brothers may also testify together ab initio. Now, in what way is this case different from forbidden relations, where a convert may not marry his maternal sister due to rabbinic decree? The laws of forbidden relations are handed over to all, and every individual chooses his own wife. Therefore, the sages issued a decree to prevent confusion between the status of a convert and that of a born Jew. However, testimony is handed over to the court, and the court knows to distinguish between the status of a born Jew and that of a convert. And the legal status of a convert who just converted is like that of a child just born, and all previous family ties become irrelevant. So while the court might be more lenient in allowing the testimony of converts who were born as brothers because they know how to distinguish the cases one from the other, in terms of people, finding their wives, finding their mates, they just didn't want that confusion, and so all the secondary prohibited relationships do apply to converts just like they do to born Jews, even though technically speaking, one who converts to Judaism has no biological relatives until he gets married and has children. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Mishnah number 4. We're well into 22a now. In the case of anyone, so this is Mishnah number 4 of chapter 2. In the case of anyone who has a brother of any kind, that brother creates a levirate bond, right? So he's going to create an obligation to perform yibum or chalitza, causing his Yevama, right, the widow of his brother, to be required to perform yibum if the first brother dies childless. And he is his brother in all respects, except for one who has a brother born from a Canaanite maidservant or from a Gentile woman, as these do not have the legal status of brothers. Right? So what are we learning here? First of all, we learned before that any kind of brother means any kind of paternal brother. So if two guys are half brothers, they have the same mother but different fathers, and one of them gets married and dies childless, his maternal half-brother does not step in to perform yibum with the widow, because these are matters of inheritance, and it's only counted their paternal half-brothers or full brothers. However, what they're saying is any kind of brother, as they'll explain, is that even a mamzer, right? So if it's a paternal half-brother, but the half-brother was born of an illegitimate union because the father had an affair with some other married Jewish woman, you might have thought that this mamzer does not step in to perform yibum or chalitza, and the answer is he does. However, if this is a brother who happens to be, and I'm trying to it's a paternal brother, but like if his father, right, was married to a Jewish woman and then had one of the brothers, and then, he was married or had relations with a non-Jewish woman and had another son, so they are paternal half-brothers. But the paternal half-brother who was born of a Gentile mother, he does not come forward for yibum, as you can imagine, because he's not a Jew. And if he converted, right, so that if he converted, he would become a Jew, but his brother who was born a Jew at the time, when he converted, it's like he doesn't have, he severs the previous biological relationships, right? So that's why they're going to omit, a brother does not trigger yibum if he, the surviving brother, is not going to step forward for yibum if he is the son of a Gentile woman. And he is his brother in all respects except for one who has a brother born from a Canaanite maidservant, back when there was slavery, or from a Gentile woman, as these do not have the legal status of brothers. Similarly, in the case of anyone who has a child of any kind, that child exempts his father's wife from yibum, since this man did not die childless. If he has a child, well, then there's no yibum. And that child is liable to receive capital punishment if he strikes his father or curses him. Thereby, if he break the fifth commandment and you hit your father, that's actually a specific law, that's not the fifth commandment, but it says you shall not curse or strike your father or your parents. That's elsewhere in the Torah. And that child is liable to receive capital punishment if he strikes his father or curses him. And he is his child in all respects, except for whoever has a child born from a Canaanite maidservant or from a Gentile woman, as these do not have the halakhic status of his children. The father shouldn't have had a child by a Gentile woman. It's going to have halachic ramifications. Gemara. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to the statement that a brother of any kind causes his Yevama, right? A brother, the Yavam, causes his Yevama, the widow, to be required to perform Yibum. What additional case does this come to add? And Rav Yehuda said this adds the case of a mamzer, who, notwithstanding his status, is considered a brother. And the Gemara wonders, but isn't that obvious? He is his brother. They have the same father. The Gemara explains, this is necessary lest you say, let us derive a verbal analogy between the word brother, stated in the verse with regard to Yibum, levirate marriage, and brother, stated with regard to the children of Jacob. Just as there, Jacob's children are of unflawed lineage and not flawed lineage, and they are not mamzers, so too here one might think that only brothers of unflawed lineage and not brothers of flawed lineage, in other words, mamzers, mamzerim in Hebrew, obligate the Yevama in Yibum. Therefore, this teaches us that a mamzer is considered a brother for the purposes of Yibum. And the Gemara asks, and say that it is indeed the law. Perhaps a brother who is a mamzer does not obligate his Yevama in Yibum. And the Gemara answers, since with regard to Yibum, if the husband had a child who was a mamzer, he would exempt the wife from Yibum. The husband's brother also causes a Yibum, also causes a levirate bond with his Yevama, even though he is a mamzer. And the Mishna stated that he is his brother in all respects. The Gemara asks, well, with regard to what law was this stated? The Gemara answers, to inherit from him and to become ritually impure for him if he is a priest, as a brother is one of the relations for whom a priest, a Kohen, is permitted to become ritually impure by attending his funeral. Generally speaking, a Kohen is not supposed to attend a funeral and enter the cemetery lest he profane himself as a Kohen. He can only do that for very close relatives. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't this obvious? It's his brother. And the Gemara answers, it might enter your mind to say that a priest does not become impure for his brother of flawed lineage, his brother who is a mamzer, since it is written with regard to priests, Leviticus 21, 1 and 2, none shall defile himself for the dead among his people, except for his kin, that is near unto him. And the master said, his kin, this is his wife, and a priest may defile himself for his wife. But it is written, he shall not defile himself, being a husband among his people, to profane himself, implying that he may not defile himself for his wife. Now, this apparent contradiction was resolved as follows. There is a husband who does become impure for his wife, and there is a husband who does not become impure. How so? He becomes impure for his wife if she was fit and was permitted to a priest, but he does not become impure for his wife if she was unfit to marry a priest. So too, one might have thought that a priest becomes impure for a brother who is of unflawed lineage and not a mamzer, but he does not become impure for a brother of flawed lineage. Therefore, this comes to teach us that he does become impure for a brother who is a mamzer, just like a brother who is not. And the Gemara asks, say this also, that by the same reasoning by which a priest may not become impure, remember, become impure means enter the cemetery and walk over graves, which when the temple was standing was an important matter, because if you walk over a grave, you become tameh, and then you have to go through a purification process, and it's going to be another week before you are permitted to enter the temple, and that's a big deal for a priest. So the Gemara says, say this also, that by the same reasoning by which a priest may not become impure for a wife who is unfit for him, he may not become impure for an unfit brother either. Just as he does not become impure for an unfit wife, he should not become impure for an unfit brother. Why not say that? And the Gemara answers, the two cases are different. As there, with regard to the unfit wife, she stands to be dismissed, since according to Torah law, unfit women must be divorced. If a Kohen marries a divorced woman, right, so he's disqualified. You're not allowed by Torah law, a Kohen is not allowed to marry a woman who is divorced. He can do it, and it will be a valid marriage, and the children are not mamzers, but the children would be disqualified from serving as priests, and this priest who married a woman who was previously divorced, he is no longer qualified to serve as a priest. If he wants to start becoming a priest, acting like a priest again, performing the duties of a priest again, he would have to divorce that wife, right? So that damage, as it were, that disqualification can be undone. But here, he is his brother. His brother, who's a mamzer, he can't undo that. He can't divorce his brother, as it were. And so that brother who happens to be a mamzer is his brother in every respect. And if that brother should die, the Kohen does enter the cemetery to attend the funeral of his brother. Now the Mishnah says, except for whoever has a brother born from a Canaanite maidservant or from a Gentile woman, as in these cases, he is not considered a brother by Jewish law. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this law? And the Gemara answers, the verse states with regard to a Jewish slave who has children with a Canaanite maidservant, the wife and her children shall be her masters. And this means that the children also have the status of Canaanite slaves, which implies that the lineage of a Canaanite maidservant's child comes from the mother and not from the father. I don't think it needs to be stated, but we'll state it. Jews do not practice slavery and haven't in many, many centuries. But in the ancient world, where slavery was utterly commonplace, there were laws governing the rights of slaves and obligations of a master to slaves. And there was a distinction made between a Jew who became enslaved, and that was more like an indentured servant, because eventually you would have to release him unless he chose to remain a slave, and non-Jews who became slaves. But even for non-Jews who were slaves of Jews, you would have obligations to that slave, something that never existed in the world before the Torah came along and said the slaves have rights. You know, you can't hurt them, you can't kill them, and there's all kinds of things that you cannot do. And, you know, to our ear, any kind of slavery is reprehensible. But in a world where slavery existed, the Torah actually came and elevated the status of the slave from what it previously was. Now the Mishnah states, with regard to anyone who has a son of any kind, that son exempts his father's wife from any levirate bond. And the Gemara asks, what is added by the phrase of any kind? What do you mean a son of any kind? And Rav Yehuda said, it adds a child who is a mamzer. What is the reason that a mamzer exempts a woman from yibum? Right? So in other words, it's very interesting. Like, how would this actually work? I'm just thinking. Yeah, so I guess what it would be is, so this man is married and he didn't have a child with his Jewish wife, but I guess he had an affair with another Jewish woman and had a child by her. They produced a mamzer. Now he dies, vis-a-vis his legal wife, he never had children. So does that wife come before his brother for yibum? No, because this man had a child, right? This man had a child. On the other hand, if this man had a child with a non-Jewish woman outside of his marriage, and then, he got married, or he was already married to a Jewish woman, and he dies, so then that woman does come before his brother for yibum, because this son that he had by a non-Jewish woman is halakhically not a Jew and does not trigger the yibum obligation. Or does not disqualify the yibum obligation. What is added by the phrase of any kind? Rabbi Yehuda says it adds a child who's a mamzer. What is the reason that a mamzer exempts a woman from any levirate bond? As the verse states with regard to yibum, and he has no ein lo child. He has no ein lo. He has no child. Deuteronomy 25:5. The phrase ein lo can be understood as ayin alav, meaning investigate him. That is to say, investigate whether he is indeed childless, because any child, even a mamzer, exempts the widow from a levirate bond. It states in the Mishnah that a child who is a mamzer is liable to receive punishment if he strikes his father or curses him. And the Gemara asks, why should he be liable? Read here the verse, you shall not curse a ruler of your people, Exodus 22:27, which is interpreted to imply that the prohibition against cursing applies only to one who acts according to the deeds of your people. However, this father must have engaged in sexual relations with a woman who was prohibited to him in order to have a child who is a mamzer. Therefore, he did not act according to the deeds of the people. In that case, why should this son be liable to receive punishment for hitting him or cursing him? And the Gemara answers, as Rav Pinchas said in the name of Rav Papa with regard to a different matter, this is referring to one who performs repentance, teshuva. Here too, it is referring to one who performed repentance after the mamzer was born. He is thereafter considered to be living in accordance with halacha, and so his mamzer son is liable to receive punishment for cursing him. Now the Gemara objects, is he in fact able to repent after fathering a mamzer? Didn't we learn in a Mishna that Shimon ben Manasseh says, what are we referring when we say that which is crooked cannot be made, that which is crooked cannot be made straight? Ecclesiastes 1:15. This is referring to one who engaged in intercourse with a relative who was forbidden to him and fathered a mamzer with her. This implies that he has no possibility of achieving total repentance because he produced the mamzer. And the Gemara responds, at least now, after repenting, he is considered as one who acts according to the deeds of your people. Although he cannot totally rectify his transgression, his child is liable to receive punishment for cursing or hitting him. The sages taught, he who unwittingly engages in sexual relations with his sister, who is the daughter of his father's lawful wife, is liable and must bring 2 sin offerings. How do you mistakenly have sex with your sister? Because you didn't know she was your sister. You know, maybe you were adopted or she was adopted out of the family. Then the children were given up for adoption. They met. They felt a powerful attraction to each other. They didn't know they were brother and sister. They had relations. And then later they learned that they're actually brother and sister. So that was an unwitting transgression. For an unwitting transgression, you bring a sin offering. If you do it on purpose, then you cannot bring a sin offering. You're just going to have to do a deep and profound atonement. But the option of bringing a sin offering is not available to you. And of course, it's not available to anyone until the temple is rebuilt. So, he who unwittingly engages in sexual relations with his sister, who is the daughter of his father's lawful wife, is liable and must bring 2 sin offerings. 2 sin offerings. He must bring 1 sin offering because she is his sister, and another because she is the daughter of his father's wife. And these are mentioned separately in the Torah. So Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda says, he is liable only because she is his sister alone, and not because of the prohibition against engaging in sexual relations with the daughter of his father's wife. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the opinion of the rabbis, the first Tana of the Baraisa, who say he brings 2 sin offerings? They said, since it is written in the Torah, the nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, you shall not uncover, Leviticus 18:9. Then why do I need the verse? The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, begotten of your father. She is your sister. You shall not uncover. Leviticus 18:11. Conclude from this that the additional verse serves to make him liable separately due to the fact that she is his sister and due to the fact that she is his father's wife's daughter. Okay, and Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says the verse states she is your sister, which comes to limit and emphasize that you hold him liable due to the fact that she is his sister, but you do not hold him liable a second time due to the fact that she is also his father's wife's daughter. And the Gemara asks, and what do the rabbis do with the verse, she is your sister? Right, the rabbis say he brings 2 sin offerings because he violated 2 verses, and Rabbi Yosef says only 1, just because she's his sister. So they're working through this debate. And the Gemara asks, so what do the rabbis do with this verse that Rabbi Yosef uses to say you only bring 1 sin offering? This verse, she is your sister. They require it in order to hold him liable to receive punishment for having relations with his sister, who is both the daughter of his father and the daughter of his mother, to say, full sister, to say that the sages do not derive an additional Torah prohibition by way of a logical derivation, i.e. an a fortiori inference. In other words, although it would seem that since he is liable to receive punishment for having relations with his father's daughter and also for having relations with his mother's daughter, this must be all the more true in a case where she is the daughter of both his father and his mother, and yet nevertheless there is no new prohibition here. Therefore, the matter was taught explicitly in the Torah to teach that the sages may not derive additional prohibitions by way of an a fortiori inference in this matter. In other words, he doesn't bring 3 offerings. He brings because it's his sister, he brings because it's his father's daughter, but he doesn't also bring because she's also his mother's daughter. And Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, answers, if so, that the matter was written for this purpose, then the merciful one should have written only your sister. Why do I need the phrase she is, as in she is your sister? This limits the law and teaches that for unintentional intercourse with his sister, who is also his father's wife's daughter, you hold him liable because she is his sister. You do not additionally hold him liable because she is his father's wife's daughter. And how do the rabbis answer Rabbi Yosei? How do they interpret the additional phrase she is? Although your sister is written, it was necessary to write she is so that you do not say that generally the sages may derive additional prohibitions by way of a logical derivation, i.e. a kal v'chomer inference, and a fortiori inference. And the Gemara explains how this principle is derived from the text. As if you would say, why do I need the term your sister that the merciful one writes in the Torah, since it is possible to derive this kal v'chomer inference, and it therefore appears redundant? And the answer is that the Torah wrote this apparently redundant term to teach the people that with regard to a matter that could be derived by means of a kal v'chomer inference, the verse unnecessarily wrote it explicitly. And the merciful one writes the term she is in order to teach that just as in this case, the sages may not derive additional prohibitions by way of a kal v'chomer inference, so too, in all other cases, they may not derive additional prohibitions that are not stated in the text. And Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, if this is the reason for the verse, then let the merciful one write, she is your sister, in the other verse, which states the nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, and not in the verse that speaks of the daughter of one's father's wife. And the Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, do with the verse which states the daughter of your father's wife? He requires it to teach that one is liable only for relations with a half-sister whose mother is someone with whom there is no possibility of forging marital ties with your father, even if she is not actually his wife. And this comes to exclude his sister from a Canaanite maidservant or a Gentile woman with whom your father cannot legally have marital ties, since betrothal does not take effect with these women. You can't make a Jewish marriage between a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman. There may be services that are performed that are, appear to be Jewish services. You can have a very nice wedding, but it won't have Jewish legal significance. Now the Gemara asks, so say, your father's wife's daughter comes to teach specifically the case of a daughter from a woman married to his father, thereby excluding from the definition of his sister from a woman who had been raped. Perhaps if she was born of a woman who was not married to his father, she would not be considered his sister, and the Gemara answers, you cannot say that due to the reasons said by Rava. As Rava raised a contradiction. In one verse it is written, the nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter you shall not uncover, which implies, consequently, that her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter is permitted. And it is written elsewhere, you shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter. You shall not take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. Leviticus 18:17. Which states explicitly that her son's daughter and daughter's daughter are prohibited. How can these texts be reconciled? Tune in tomorrow. That's the end of page 22. And we'll tune in tomorrow to find out how Rava's statements of these cases where the Torah seems to both prohibit and permit the same person, how did the sages reconcile those statements? All right, let's see if there's any questions or comments on Yevamos 22. Bill, question. Say a man converts to Judaism and then his father converts as well, as they are both Ben Abraham. Are they both Ben Avraham, or is the son now Ben and the father's Hebrew name? I'm sure the answer is yes, of course, they'll both be Ben Avraham, and I think that's the right answer. But the question popped into my head and refused to leave until asked. Yes, I think they are both Ben Avraham. And there was an interesting case that I read when I was looking at a little research, like where this happens, right? Two brothers convert. Well, then there was the case of the two brothers who convert to give testimony, but also two brothers who convert, or a brother and sister who convert. You know what? I forget what the case was, but the answer is they're both Ben Avraham. Gwen, I think the two sin offerings is cause one sin against the sister and one sin against the father. That's interesting, right? That's interesting. Right, there are two prohibitions that are written, but Gwen, what you're suggesting is why would the Torah seek to impose these two prohibitions that the rabbis detail and say, no, there are two separate prohibitions. And it's interesting because if he did that, it's not only a sin against, between the brother and sister who shouldn't be doing that, but it's also a sin against the parents that the brother and sister would do that. Very interesting. Yeah, could well be. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, and we'll find out how Rava reconciles where the Torah seems to permit and prohibit the same person. Have a great night.